open it up to questions now.
I had three little items I want to throw out to you and get your reactions to. Number one.
She asked that the constitutional amendment would be getting judges to oppose the institutionalization of Sharia. And my answer is that as long as Muslims are present in this society and gaining numbers and gaining power, then we are consigning ourselves to an eternal struggle, an eternal and internal struggle in this, within America against a constant pressure of Islam. So I don't think that that's just a recipe for a situation in which Islam is going to become ever stronger, and we have to maintain a constant resistance against it, which also, another element of this that I didn't mention in my opening speech, on the question of terrorism. Just as, so long as Muslims are present and growing in America, we would have to maintain a constant political war to try to keep Sharia from spreading. In the same way, as long as Muslims are present in large numbers in America and other Western countries, we have to maintain this anti-terror regime forever. We have to be taking off our shoes in airports forever. We have to be careful going through this humiliating and depressing process every time we fly in an airplane forever. We have to have Pennsylvania Avenue looking like a war zone forever. Why? Because, and nobody ever thinks this through, because there are Muslims present in our society and traveling freely in the West. So the only solution for both of those things, I think, is the removal of Muslims from the West.
I'd like to comment on this. It's one thing, as I think this might help with your question. One of the things I've tried to consistently emphasize is that the problem with Islam, it's not an issue of moderate Muslims or radical Muslims. It's a matter of Orthodox theology. And the problems within Islam, these stem out of Orthodox theological belief. Now you have Muslims who will not believe in the tenets of their religion, as I mentioned earlier. However, the fact is, you may claim to believe in a religion, but just because you believe it doesn't mean you're following it to its full capacity and to the teachings that it prescribes. What I'm saying is, Orthodox theology teaches these things, and for many Muslims who are well-intentioned, faithful, and pious, they end up doing these things, or at least coming to a point where they support or where they will not deny support for them because they are so intrinsic to their religious belief, that to, not their personal belief, but to the belief of Islam itself, that to deny them, it would entail apostasy, or at the very least heresy, upon them. And heresy, the punishment for Muslims in the afterlife is torment in the lowest parts of hell. In this life, it's ostracism up to and including death and execution.
Can I ask what is the, how does heresy on the part of a Muslim come into effect in response to that question? Well, so how would a Muslim get into a heresy in that situation?
Denying an aspect of Islam, denying the killing of apostates. For instance, you can deny that, but that's heretical in Orthodox theology. It's, from a theological perspective, if I'm striving to be a faithful Muslim.
Oh, I see. What you're saying is, if America prevented Muslims from practicing Sharia, and the Muslims accepted that, those Muslims would be heretics?
That would be heresy.
Well, fine.
Muslims should not immigrate to non-Muslim societies, except, with the exception, they are attempting to bring Islam, essentially enlightenment, as he would say, into these societies. I'm sure you've heard of the concept, the House of Islam and House of War. This was coined in the 14th century by the Muslim theologian Ibn Taymiyyah. And the idea is that the House of Islam, the lands and the peoples of Islam, the people who are din al-haq, the religion of truth, and the religion that comes from Allah, as Islam teaches, will eventually assimilate all of the non-Muslims, the house of war, the dar al-harb. It's a matter of time when it happens. So in this case, yes, they are permitted, but it's within a theological context of expansionism. Qiyya is a concept that basically means lying for Allah. In other words, it's based in several passages in the Koran where it says that non-Muslims, or Muslims are not supposed to take non-Muslims as awliya, usually translated as friends, but it can also mean protectors, it can mean guardians, it can mean associates, really. So the concept here is that if I am a Muslim and I suspect that by my speech I might endanger myself or other Muslims, or if it's being done for the spread and propagation of Islam, I am allowed to lie to you, and it's not a sin. Once again, it's considered maqbool. It's perfectly acceptable. And Muslims have often used this, I think more often against other Muslims. Usually Shias use it against Sunnis, and Sunnis use it against Shias historically, but we're seeing a lot of that now today in the West, because, once again, for the purpose of expanding Islam, and the purpose of mostly doing what's called da'wah, or missionary work. So, in other words, it's perfectly okay for me, if I'm evangelizing you, as an instance, for Islam, to lie to you, but once you convert, remember, you cannot leave.
Taqiyya is okay. Then they will lie. How can you trust them? Because
As far as the methods by which this is determined, the overall purpose is, for example, some Muslims come right out and indicate what they're about, what they believe in. Not all Muslims practice taqiyya. There seems to be two modes. Sometimes they are very eager to tell the world what they believe. Others practice taqiyya. And I'm sure both those options are in the Islamic law. Everything they do has it's the greatest book of strategy ever written. But my overall object is not to say, oh, we're just going to remove the troublesome ones and the rest, if they promise not to. No, the object is, recognize this is radical, but I think only radical steps in the long run will help us, is to reduce Muslim populations in America down to a small fraction of what they are now, and then they really will not be able to manifest any kind of serious Islam. They will not be a threat at that point.
And I should like to emphasize, just as a quick side to that, you mentioned how do you tell if someone's lying or not. That's a serious problem. And that's about all I can say about that.
Bob Weisberg.
Let me ask you, pose a simpler, far simpler solution than would you have suggested, but may actually come out the same way, which is the Americanization of Islam. Now we do know that, and you find
The solution,
yeah,
you're speaking of
but it
finding
happens all the time in other
basically
religions.
a nominal Islam.
Yeah, it happens
And
all
some
the
people
time in
believe in
other
that.
religions.
But how do we bring that about? If you read, I've criticized Daniel Pipes, but here he's the source of information on what these, or he's the main source of information on what these Muslim American groups are up to. They're not getting Americanized. They're getting more. They're getting stronger. They have a 100-year-long strategy. So you want to cut off the Saudi influence in the hope that the Muslims will then Americanize.
Well, that's what France is trying to do.
I should comment on this. I'm going to translate what you're saying. What you're saying is basically sow heresy.
yeah,
Pretty much is what that means.
Of course.
And I can tell you that when it comes to dealing with religion, any religion, there is always a tendency to revert to orthodoxy. Because when you have many different interpretations, this was one of the problems that happened in Christianity during the 4th century. There were many different interpretations about the divinity of Jesus. And the Orthodox position has always been that Jesus is God, he's divine. So what happened? They had a council, and orthodoxy was formally defined in formal doctrinal terms, although the dogma had always been there. And the heresy, which was called Arianism, eventually disappeared. In Islam, they've had Reformation movements like this during the Middle Ages. What happened to them? They all died out, and for the same reason, whether it's in Christianity, whether it's in Judaism, Islam, name your religion. When you have a defined orthodox dogma, and you start having heretical divisions, eventually it will work for a time, But people will come to a point and they will say, as Pontius Pilate said in the New Testament, quid est veritas, what is truth?
But
And
you
they will
did
seek
have
for truth.
Protestantism, though.
Yeah,
You
but
did
you
have
have,
Protestantism.
all over Europe, you have religion that is on its last legs. The only people in churches are older women and tourists. And to suggest somehow that there's an inner vitalism in religion, this sort of innate orthodoxy which emerges, is irrepressible, is belied by what is now going on in Europe.
I think
How does the decadence of Christianity in Europe say anything about
Well, his
the nature
point-
of Islam?
yeah,
Bob?
his point is that orthodoxy will always reassert itself, okay? And my argument is, if that's true, how do you explain the sorry state of Christianity in Europe?
once again, you're talking.
Exactly right.
Once again, you're talking about two different religions here. But I would like to emphasize that in the case of Christianity, you've had in Europe for a very long time, and this goes back hundreds of years, a case of a lack of orthodoxy and a question of what is truth. One of the reasons people talk about the spread of Protestantism, you have literally hundreds of sects claiming to represent, and this goes into issues of Christian theology, which I don't want to get into because it's off topic. But when it comes down to what is Christianity, what is, in the case of church leadership, who is in charge? There is in many other countries outside of Europe, there is a resurgence of orthodoxy. And also within Europe, as you said, people have given up. People have chosen to stop believing. As I mentioned in the case with Islam, these problems with Islam will cease when people stop believing in Islam. This is a case of a personal decision. I don't believe in this religion anymore. I do not believe in this philosophical system and way of life. And that comes from within. So, with regard to Americanization, until people stop believing in Islam, and that's a gradual process.
We could have a guy with a guitar singing,
Well, maybe American society would not accept religious or Orthodox Jews too.
The reason for the amendment is that, see, the amendment has nothing to do with anything other than Islam. The need for the amendment comes from the fact that the First Amendment says that there shall not be any restriction on religion. That means that any restriction on Islam, including attempts, as the lady further back mentioned, attempts to restrict the spread of Sharia by judicial means, would probably be stopped on the basis of the First Amendment. I am saying that as long as the First Amendment is in place, we are essentially helpless to defend ourselves from Islam. That's why, either through statute or through amendment, you could have a statute which says that under the laws of the United States, Islam is not a religion for the purpose of the First Amendment.
Right.
Islam is a
It's
political
more than
movement,
religion.
Islam is a political movement which is antithetical to our Constitution, our way of life, just as communism was. And perhaps it could be done on the basis of, but the point is, one way or another, we have to get around the First Amendment. So let's say there was such an amendment. It wouldn't affect any other religion. This amendment would only be about Islam.
Well, Larry,
The
could
First
this be
Amendment
done
would still
under
exist.
sedition laws, because really, it's advocating, and it's orthodox, the overthrow of another country and the overthrow of all other religions and all
Right.
other cultures. So under our sedition laws and all the laws we have to defend a sovereign state, this particular ism can't coexist with ours. So we
But
can do that.
are they committing sedition right now?
That's
That gets problematic. Are they actively seeking to overthrow the government and Constitution of the United States right now? I'm not aware of that.
Well, I think
Their
they
long
are.
range
They are.
goal is to do that by gaining power, and they're operating to a large extent legally. So, as long as the First Amendment does create our own helplessness. Sir.
Does it bother you that your,
Oh.
I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
that your idea is, it just seems like that's never going to happen, whether it's ethical or not ethical. I personally think you know, to me, I thought I was a conservative until I met you, but, I don't see why that would even help you. I mean, why wouldn't you take the logical step further, since you're putting it all out there anyway, that the whole thing is bad news, and by containing them in their own neighborhood, it's not even gonna work. You'll still have hell at the airports and at the Capitol, because all you need is one loon. And if you're gonna talk about dogma, the dogma of their religion is you have to turn every blade of grass over in every place that has never been seen by a Muslim. I mean, that part of the inherent religion.
That's why
is
my
to
solution
stand
is
out.
the simplest. The goal is to.
But is that what you really mean? I mean,
The goal is to remove, is to remove the Muslim populations from the West.
But that's not even gonna help. I mean,
Why?
because their reason for being is to spread it out, so you'll always
But
be
what-
battling them in a realistic kind of way. It's just not a realistic approach, it seems.
Well,
Why not
if
tempt
they
them
are,
with the fruits of American culture? Look how many other religions don't stick to the dogma. I mean, if you go to Hasidism, they don't want, you know, scantily clad bike riders in their neighborhood. To me,
okay, so you
yes,
believe
I
that you believe that Islam is basically not any different from any other religion, and that.
No, in its dogma, I think it's got a lot of big problems, but I
Right.
think most people don't follow dogma. What percent of people, you know, Jews, what percent of Jews follow the dogma?
Oh.
You only need a few.
Yeah, but you'll have them anyway, you're gonna have them anyway. It's not a realistic solution.
But let me ask you this.
Yeah.
So let's say it was 1960, and we hadn't passed the 1965 Immigration Act yet, and it's proposed that we open up immigration on an equal basis to every country in the world, which is what happened in 1965. And you're one of the legislators. You're in the U.S. Senate. Would you support a bill that opens up immigration from all the Muslim countries into America?
You know, I'd be afraid, I mean, why not just open the border now with Mexico instead
Well,
of
no,
kicking them
let's
all
stay
out?
with
We
one.
would just
Let's
bring
stay
all
with
them
one
out.
issue at a time.
I don't
Answer the
know.
question.
I
would
don't know.
definitely-
Really
And
work
what is the
on it.
work that would really work?
Tempt them with the American way, with logic, with whatever.
Assimilation. We can assimilate the Muslims.
They use
Okay.
the internet against
Okay,
you,
there's the
that's
assimilationist
If you don't-
solution to Islam.
If you don't
The
mind,
liberal.
if you don't mind, I'd like to comment on that, on
Yeah.
the assimilationist aspect. In the 1950s, there was a young Muslim man who came to America, and he was very fascinated with American culture and American life. He was well exposed to it. He lived for, I think, at least 4 years during his college years, and he experienced everything that a young American male would experience. And he later on wrote about it extensively. His name was Syed Qutb. He was involved with the Muslim Brotherhood. He was a terrorist. He was executed by I think it was the Anwar Sadat regime in 1972 for sedition against the government. His conclusion was that American life and all of its fruits were decadent, terrible, and unworthy. And Islam was the only solution to the decadence which he saw. Just because we have cultural offerings, or we offer people money or whatever else they would like, it does not mean they're going to accept that, because Islam, and as much as we can see critical aspects of it, it does answer some questions. What is the purpose of life? Why do I exist? Is there a God? How do I get to heaven? What am I supposed to do to be good? What is good? What is evil? The big questions that people think about. And it provides a convincing answer for many people, and many do believe it honestly in faith. And theologically, yes, it does have some good answers in these aspects, but as I pointed out, there are many problematic theological issues. And when one truly believes in Islam and truly follows it, these issues inevitably manifest in various forms, but they do manifest in a certain way.
Thank you. I'd like to thank both of you for your presentations.
Thank you.
And my question relates to your reaction to this. You're kind of looking at things from a macro point of view.
Okay.
And I'll just say this about the First Amendment. I have to get this off my chest. Radical Islam would like to get rid of the First Amendment also. And they're trying to do that in cases in the UK and up in Canada.
Yes, that's true.
Okay, so the First Amendment protects us, in my
Yes.
opinion, my humble opinion. Okay,
Oh, yeah.
but getting back to the proactive approach, it seems. How do you react to that? There's 1.5 billion Muslims in the world. Whether we got rid of all the Muslims in this country or not, we still have the internet. Okay, people get self-radicalized in this country.
Correct.
People in our prisons, people who are locked up, become radicals?
Very correct. I think with regard to the issues of radicalization, a certain kind of mental pattern is a certain kind of absolutism that possesses them all. The question is, and this is what concerns me the most, is a person doing, say, an abortion clinic, as an example, is that person acting in accordance with the Orthodox teachings of his faith? Is that person acting in accordance with his Orthodox religious teaching or not? And in the case of Islam, these people do. And they act, I said, as in accordance of Islamic theology that stems from the dogma, that is unchanging. In the case of Christianity, Judaism, or other religions, at least speaking for Christianity and for Judaism, most oftentimes these people don't. They act out of their own personal conviction, but it does not mean that his beliefs represent what the faith that he is claiming to hold. And that, I think, is the very key, important difference.
Yes, regarding the assimilation, Islam permits the killing of Muslims who are not truly observant. So we would only be magnifying the problem, really. And in fact, it seems to permit the killing of Muslims for the greater good of Islam, because the Iranians sometimes talk about, well, we wiped out Israel, we'll also wipe out half of Iran. That's fine, because it will be for the greater good. Mm-hmm. And one other question I wanted to ask you, you said jihad is only a mabud, neither here nor there, neither. I thought jihad was the ultimate, and the martyr is the ultimate in Islam, the revered figure who lives forever.
Two aspects. Let me clarify that one for you first. What I said was maqbul, and that means acceptable. And I was speaking when I said that in the context of permissibility to engage in jihad, at the very least, in the very lowest, in the most liberal-minded sense that I could have. It's considered maqbul, which means acceptable, and that is, it's neither harmful nor helpful. As you said, in the case of martyrdom, martyrdom is regarded very highly, and martyrdom in Islam is defined not as one dies for the faith out of a persecution or execution by someone else, but usually it is defined as one who dies while actively waging war against somebody else. And that is jihad. What I'm just emphasizing is, from the most liberal possible perspective, it is at the very least acceptable. That is the very lowest degree that is regarded within Islam. It is regarded very highly, and it is true that in Islam, martyrs, those who die in jihad, are given the most bountiful rewards in paradise. And as the Hadith says, their wounds will smell like musk, and they'll have 72 virgins, and they'll enter through the martyr's gate into a Jannah, which is Islamic heaven.
Are you saying that there is no command to wage jihad or to financially assist people waging jihad?
What I'm saying is, it's not required in the most liberal sense. I'm speaking of in the most liberal-minded sense. It's not mandatory, however, it is at the very least permissible. It is oftentimes in Islam, it is recommended.
Is it anything more than just permissible?
Far more.
So what is it beyond permissible?
Considered as something that is very notable and very good and very recommended. Mm-hmm. And like I said, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give a holistic perspective here. In other words, if I'm trying to account for all possible perspectives about, in this case, jihad within Islam. I'm certainly not saying that jihad is condemned by Islam, because that's not the case at all, if that's what you're thinking.
Why, I'm curious, why did you emphasize the idea that jihad is only, in the most liberal interpretation, permissible? Why is that significant?
Because most people are not aware of that. Most people are not aware of that. Many people they are correct to recognize that jihad is something that happens very frequently in Islam and is commended by Islam to do. However, in recognizing that many people think that jihad is something that is absolutely commanded always for every single Muslim must go out and and blow themselves up on a train or something. Right. That's not correct. Right. What I'm just trying to emphasize is the whole range of opinions that exist about jihad, of Orthodox views. So that way, yes, in the very lowest possible sense, it is permissible. In the most conservative sense, it is not mandatory, but it is almost mandatory for one's salvation, in the absolute most conservative sense. Once again, that's just so you can see a broad range of views. Yes, sir.
Well, I just have a few things to say. I'm
Okay.
new to all of this, so you're making quite an impression on me. This problem is very paradigmatic in nature. The two lines of thought. The one line of thought says I'm going to be rewarded if I destroy in this life, and the other line of thought says I'm going to be rewarded in the... That's how I see it.
I would emphasize that with that, you mentioned people recognizing their problems, or in this case, the problem that is found within their religion, or the issues. There's a Coptic Orthodox priest by the name of Father Zakaria Boutros. Some of you may have heard of him. Father Boutros, what he does is he speaks in Arabic, and what he does is he discusses issues like this from the Koran and the Hadith, various theological and issues of Islamic Sharia law, jurisprudential issues. And he has made thousands, I mean literally thousands of converts from Islam to Coptic Orthodox Christianity because of the fact that he talks about these issues, and people recognize that despite this is what they were brought up with, there is something fundamentally wrong, missing, or that is not right. Or when in comparison to what I see as being offered to me, why do I want to continue to persist in my current beliefs? A great example of this is actually a situation in Africa. I was listening recently to an Arabic commentary. It was on Al Jazeera with a very well-known Muslim missionary from Libya. And he was talking about a problem in Africa in which is in 100 years, 67% of all their Muslims have apostatized. 67% of all of Africa. Most of the ones that are left are mostly left in the Arab portion of North Africa. And the reason why is because of mostly Christian missionary work, primarily between Catholics and various Pentecostal sects. But the reason why this has happened is, as I'm listening to this interview, it shows that people are being offered a different alternative. They see that there is something that is found within, in this case, Christianity, that Islam does not possess, something that is dignified, something that is positive. And so as much as we tend to focus on the negative aspects of what may happen, I emphasize at the end of my talk there is much hope, because in spite of these problems, people can, if over time, gradually come to see these issues, their theological roots, and decide for themselves what they want to follow.
But you've indicated that the Islamic individual views all other religions as having no dignity whatsoever.
That is true.
Can I jump in?
Please.
What Andrew, Mr. Bieszad is talking about is the possibility of converting people out of Islam to Christianity or some other religion. Now this is what I have a question for.
I think the objectives have to be clearly defined before you can change anything. And there has to be a distinctive paradigm that's outlined, and the steps should be very clear in terms of how you're going to go from step A to step B to step C.
And it's very true, and a lot of that has been going on in a very organized and methodical manner.
I'd like to ask Andrew, you seem to be saying that converting Muslims en masse to Christianity is the way to save the West from Islam. Are you saying that?
What I'm saying is conversion, I think I've said before, is this particular issue is part of a larger solution. So yes, we do have to protect ourselves. However, in addition to protecting ourselves, and once again, this is part of a holistic solution, is that we must engage in dealing with Islam in intellectual change. An intellectual change which can involve religious conversion, which can involve a simple change of mindset. It can involve a change of how one perceives Islam completely. And it can involve a change of mixing, of culture, of aspects of how does Islam mix into America, and how does it eventually, basically...
Do you think it's possible to bring Islam to an end by conversion.
Islam to an end? Well, I will quote for you what the Sheikh said in that Al Jazeera interview. He said, and now this is in the context of Africa. This is not the context of the West I'm speaking. He said in the context of Africa, the situation is Islam could die out within 50 years. I'm serious. In sub-Saharan Africa.
Oh, in sub-Saharan Africa.
Sub-Saharan Africa.
They'll move to Europe. Will die out in 50 years.
What was that, Bob?
Africans will die out in 50 years.
Oh.
What I'm saying, though, specifically is that, yes, this is an important aspect, but within that, we have to watch for ourselves, and we have to take cultural measures, we have to take societal measures, whatever those are, in order to protect ourselves. So I think I'm saying pretty much what I've always said, perhaps in a different form, but...
Well, before we go back to you, is there anybody else who has a question?
Yeah, reading recently that as they are permitted to question their faith through the internet, the Muslims, could that possibly open up a door to larger conversions?
What I'm speaking about is it has opened the door in the case of the internet, and it's changed many people. And like I said, I'm speaking about from the perspective of conversion alone. With the case with Islam, I'm not trying to give any pipe dreams here. What I'm saying is the situation with our society has taken a very long time to develop, and it's going to take a very long time for, if we are hoping for a reversal or we're hoping for a change, it'll take a long time for it to happen. It'll be generational. As that sheikh I quoted said, we're not talking 2 or 3 generations, we're talking 10, 20, 30. But, once again, the idea here is setting up a situation where society can be stable and propagate itself long term. And then in this case, it involves a change within the Islamic mindset, moving essentially out of Islam.
How many Muslims do you think are actually radical in the percentages? What were your being very conservative here?
In the world?
In the world.
I have.
They say 10%.
Well, then that's the.
200 million.
Yes,
Yeah.
well, Pew just did a study.
So you're talking about.
Well, you could say that in Indonesia, which is the largest Muslim country in the world, there has been a reversal in the government in Indonesia from a purely Islamic government back to somewhat, I wouldn't call it secular, but a more liberalized version. So
regarding Indonesia, during Israel's war with Gaza, there were camps in Indonesia where people were already training to ship off to Gaza to fight. So I don't know how liberal Indonesia is becoming. I mean, I'm not sure about that. But so you're saying that about over 100 million Muslims are radical?
I wouldn't want to put a number on that because I don't find a place to put a number on who is radical. How do you define radical?
How many Muslims are Orthodox? Because you said that Orthodox Muslims pretty much have views which we would hold to be radical.
I certainly don't have time to ask 1.3 billion Muslims if they're Orthodox. What I'm saying is, within Orthodox Islamic orthodoxy, these theological tendencies are there, and as I mentioned, whether one actively supports them or chooses to deny them, they still exist, and they are prevalent, and they cannot be removed from the faith. So if one chooses to follow them, it's not wrong that he chooses to do that. It's not wrong, is the point that I'm trying to emphasize here. So yes, while individual people, or even entire peoples, for whatever reason, might choose to, as Pope John Paul II would say, take a cafeteria approach to their religion. I don't want to associate that with a number because, once again, I can't give you an exact number. What I'm saying is Orthodox Islamic theology itself is inherently programmed from its very internal nature to have, once again, a mentality where it wants to spread and bring other people into its fold, and a mentality that denies the humanity of non-Muslims.
I think what Andrew was saying, if I can add something here, is that the number does not matter.
I mean,
what matters is the principle, and the dogmas that define Islam will always be what is most what is most active
I mean,
and authoritative within Islam.
And the
So
numbers are
whatever the
very low.
number is at any given moment that we, by some definition,
it's
define
numbers
as
that- I mean,
radical,
8.5
it doesn't
million
matter.
Nazis
Radicalism
over
will
Europe.
always be, there will be periods of abeyance, but radicalism will always be there. And in any confrontation between radicalism and more moderate forms, the radical forms will always have the theological advantage.
Thank you.
I think if people got out there and the media said, guess what, guys, wake up, okay? It's not a small radical, it's actually 30%. Let's get a number going. 300 million of them want to do this. People might say, ooh, that's something significant, and it's not a peaceful religion, because that's what people believe here. It's peaceful, it's good. And you know what? They come to this country, they come to other countries. You think, you're talking about, conversion and generational changes. It's not going to happen. If they're not changing and they're hanging out in bars and going to gyms and living the American dream and going to American colleges because of their headset, if they're not changing that way, they're not taking it in and they're here, they're in Europe, it's not happening. They're getting more radical than their parents even. Okay, we got to get that information forward. Even if it's to the government, like our government, who's completely turning their eyes, I think every congressman, I think every senator needs to have sent to them exactly translations, what the Quran's calling for, what they think of Jews. I think we need to get to our government on some kind of unity that this is what the Quran means, okay, and this is what's happening.
The information that they're teaching in the mosques and the madrasas, that are Saudi funded, people don't know what they're teaching in there. They don't know it. They should see what it is. Then they'll know what the dangers are. It would be very good. Because Helen Thomas, that old lady reporter, she said, why do they hate us? What do they want from us? She's actually voicing, it sounded idiotic, but when you really think about it, we have not named who this enemy is, what they think. We don't know our enemy. They know us, and they're playing us like a fiddle. We need to tell all of America who they are.
And that's precisely what I'm saying.
Yes.
We have to identify this as
Yes.
Orthodox Islamic theology.
Yes.
That is the problem. That is what we have to focus on, because that is the core out of which all of these other issues germinate. It is from that which they come, and it is to that which they return. And if we focus on anything other than that, it will just lead us to non-valid or useless conclusions. We've had too many of those.
We have to stop this political incorrectness of not describing someone or something for
Right.
what it is.
But see, I have a political correctness I have a problem with conservatives. It's true to say that that's political correctness, but I don't think it is sufficient. To say, well, that's political correctness. Okay, then if we get rid of political correctness, then what do? Political correctness is just the enforcement mechanism of the ideology of our society, which is liberalism, which is the belief that it is wrong to discriminate against non-white or non-Western groups and it's wrong to suggest any significant difference between groups. And if there are differences, then they must be covered up. So if blacks are far more committing violent crime than others, that point is never mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So, and why is that once again? Well, because everybody is assumed to be the same, and if you say that everybody is not the same, then that is morally wicked. Now, unless that belief is directly identified and opposed, then we're not going to be able to change it. And I feel that when conservatives complain about political correctness, even though that statement is true, I think they're not getting to the heart of the problem. And the heart of the problem is that we're not supposed to discriminate or make any differences between groups.
Judeo-Christian philosophy is a life-embracing philosophy. So this is what you have. That's why they can send their kids out to be suicide bombers and martyrs, and that's the highest thing their kid could be. That couldn't happen in Jewish Christian homes because we value life. We don't want our children to die for any reason.
Right.
So, that's the core of it.
That's their right.
But not to kill others.
Not in
No,
American
to
society.
to turn their children into
The children
suicide
have rights in
bombers.
American society and the parents cannot kill them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.